Hey, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Joe Donnarummo, Senior Superintendent Director of Lean Application for Lindbeck Group. We're based out of Houston, Texas, with offices in San Antonio and Fort Worth, with our primary markets being in healthcare, higher education, and performing and cultural arts buildings.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name's Keon Zandy. I'm COO of Skiles Group. We are a general contractor based in Dallas, Texas. We have a strong focus on healthcare construction and are licensed in 13 states.
So Keon and I always like to start with the why. Why are we here today? Why are we on this call? I'm sure there's a pretty good diverse mix of professionals on the call. And, you know, perhaps you're an operations leader within your organization. Maybe you've heard about Lean, you've read about Lean. Maybe even sit on a peer group and see other firms implement Lean tools and methodologies and thinking maybe this is the right step our organization needs to take to start having greater efficiencies in the field and, you know, shoring up our workflow, having a more reliable workflow. Perhaps you're an executive and maybe you reside in the C-suite. You've also heard about Lean. You've heard maybe some peers talk about it, and you're thinking, you know, maybe this could be Lean is the catalyst that allows us to hit that operational BHAG that we said in our strategic planning meeting 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe you're a field leader. And maybe you've been voluntold to be on the webinar. You have an operations guy wanting you to get more into Lean, and you're a skeptic. Maybe you think it's fair to say maybe you think Lean is BS. You just don't believe in it, and you're kind of checking it out, which is fair. And you know, it's okay to have that opinion. You know, and to that point, you know, maybe you and your firm, you've been delivering projects for, you know, the last 20, 25 years. You've never missed a CO date. Your firm's made a lot of money. Your clients love you. They call you up for any of their work. You're thinking to yourself, you know, why should I listen? Why should I engage? Why should I think about performing work differently in the way I do now? Let's pause there for a second. Look, first, Keon and I, let's unpack at least the current state of our industry, the way it is today, and let's see if we can at least get some consensus of what the current state looks like. Now, the first thing I want to touch on is design drawings. And typically when we give this presentation, I'll always ask a question. I'll ask the audience, I'll say, do you think design drawings are better today or maybe 30 years ago? And I always get chuckles and I always get laughs, and everyone's like, no, they're better 20, 30 years ago. And we'll talk about that. And don't take this is not a dig. I'm not poking at our design partners. In fact, let's take a second and unpack what obstacles and challenges they have to face. The speed at which they have to produce documents when they're engaged by an owner is alarming. Resources, you know, it's just not the GCs and our trade partners who are dealing with resource issues. Our design partners are experiencing the same thing. You know, our last big recession as a country in 08, 09, we had a tremendous outflux of design professionals leave the construction industry to other industries, and we're still dealing with that backlash. Commoditization. Again, it's just not our GCs and our trade partners who are feeling the pain of being commoditized, and our design communities feeling the same pinch. So because we don't have enough time, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough money, our dependence upon technology is at an all-time high. We're using technology more than we ever have before. And it's created this copy-paste culture where we'll go back, we got a new building that we're trying to put together, and you know what, this is really similar to a project we did 4 or 5 years ago. Let's go pull that up. We'll go grab some of those details. We don't take the time to vet out, to collaborate, to flush out, to make sure that is the appropriate detail. That's the appropriate design for what this building's intended to do because of the speed, the resources, and the commoditization and our dependence upon technology. Let's talk skilled labor. You know, again, whenever we give this presentation, one question I always love to ask is, you know, in the audience, raise your hand. When's the last time you had a true master mason on your job site? And every once in a while, I'll get maybe at one hand, but, two at the most. And they just don't exist anymore. They're like unicorns. I'm not going to get into, all the different causes of why we are in this situation with skilled labor. That's not what this presentation is about. But there is one point I do want to hit, and one thing that's near and dear to my heart that does play into this, and it's our education system today. And again, this isn't a knock or a dig on our wonderful educators who do an amazing job of preparing our next generation of young leaders. However, we've taken vocation out of the high schools, out of the K-12 education system. We've projected on these students that the only way to be successful is you got to do good in high school, you need to go to college, you need to get a degree, you need to get a white collar, and that's going to be your definition of success. We've robbed them of the opportunity just to say, college isn't for everyone. It's okay to come out of high school, to go learn a trade, to go learn a skill, to go straight into the workforce, start providing for yourself, and over a career, have a great career, have an excellent quality of life, be able to support your family, and not have to go into significant debt because you went to college. And we've robbed a lot of young people from that opportunity. Keon, you want to talk labor in general?
Sure. So Joe's talking about skilled labor. Let's just talk about our labor shortage in our industry today. So the number of unfulfilled jobs in the construction industry is at an all-time high. And what's tough is that it's not that this seems like it could go away anytime soon. It's not like the labor halls are about to fill back up and this problem will just work itself out. We're really going to have to start figuring out more ways to do more with less in our industry. I want to talk a little bit about our trade partners. And again, this isn't a knock to our trade partners, but if I were to ask any of my construction project superintendents, does a trade partner foreman know your project when he gets on site for the first time better today than he did maybe 15 or 20 years ago? And what they'll tell me is, they'll say, Keon, when they come on our site today, they hadn't even seen the drawings yet. We're printing drawings for them. And again, this isn't a knock, but think about it. Our trade partners are the ones having to manage this labor crisis. They're the ones that are struggling to find qualified, skilled labor. They have to deal with projects that are supposed to start, then they're over budget, then they don't start on time. But then when they do start, they have to be ready with all their people to go. They have to manage general contractors who have superintendents who don't understand flow, who don't update their schedule, who don't know how to run their projects in a way where a trade can be successful. And so because of these things, we're experiencing the impact of that in our business right now. And then finally, if we're talking to our guys in the business that have been around for a while, and we say, what else do you feel like is different than in the past? And we start talking about our workforce today. We have 5 generations working in our business today. What's unique is that in the past, it was very hierarchical. If you were a CEO or an owner of a construction company, you may be a guy in your late 50s or 60s. Your executives, maybe late 40s or 50s. Your senior PMs, senior superintendents kind of work their way down. Today, it's not uncommon to have an executive in their 30s that have direct report superintendents who are in their 60s. The problem is that the communication style between the generations are very different. And traditionally, we have not been a business that prioritized good communication. And why should we? We had better documents. We had more skilled labor. There was plenty of labor to go around. That labor and those foremen knew the project when they got to your project. And so it's pretty clear to see that the game is starting to change around us in our industry.
So the path forward. Hopefully what we just described, we can all agree that is reflective of the current state of the industry that we all work and live in right now. So let's take it back to where we started. So you and your firm, you've been delivering projects for the last 25 years, let's say. You've never missed a CO day. Your firm's been highly successful. You've made a lot of money. Your client loves you. You get repeat work. Why should you change? Why should you listen? Why should you engage? Why should you think about performing work in a different way? Does it not seem harder and harder each and every year to push, pull, and drag your projects across that CO finish line? Think about your people. When do you think the last time your employees just got to work 50 hours, 60 hours, 70, 80? The industry's broken. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And we're going to have to find a way to be more efficient, to do more with less. And that's why Keon and I are here today, because we feel that the first right step to take is leveraging lean tools and methodologies in the field to start overcoming what we just described in that current state.
Our presentation is almost like the cliff notes of our book, The Lean Builder. And, you know, we were inspired to write the book because, you know, we would have a lot of field resources come to us, project superintendents, trade partner foremen, who were tired of working the hours they were working. They were getting burnout in our business. They were willing to try anything. And the tough thing was that when they would ask for some type of resource, the resources available, while good, really weren't geared for them. There's a lot of great academic books. There's a lot of manufacturing books like Toyota Way or 2 Second Lean, which is a great book just on how to think differently and look for ways to continue to improve, but not a practical manual for the field where they can start implementing lean on their projects. Now, I will say our version of lean is what we call builder's lean. This is based on our experience coming up through the ranks, how we've seen it best work in the field with construction folks. But we really were deliberate about how we lay out the concepts in the book and where to start your journey to get the most success, to make sure you're building the right culture before you even try to implement something like the last planner system. And so as we go through our presentation today, the first part may seem very simple, and that it's intended to be that way. The second part, when we get into last planner, may seem like we're drinking from a fire hose just because of the amount of time we have to talk about it. Joe and I could easily go on for 8 hours about it, but hopefully what you guys walk away with today is maybe a better understanding of how you can get more value by implementing lean on your projects.
So again, to build off what Keon was talking about, we were very strategic in the manner in which we outline and introduce the tools and the steps to the reader, both in the book and in this presentation today, to start building the right job site culture that's going to foster those behaviors of mutual respect, trust. Start with the daily huddle, because it's the single most important tool to start leveraging to start moving your job site culture in the right direction. It's low-hanging fruit. So if you currently don't implement a daily huddle, that's what we want to talk about. You know, when I got into this industry, let me kind of give you the previous state of how I would run a subcontractor meeting. It was always Tuesdays at 9 a.m. I'd walk into the job trailer. I'd go get the schedule I printed out and created by myself in a silo. I'd walk in, I'd throw it on the table. There'd be some donuts out, and it looked similar to this picture. There'd be some joking and banter going back and forth. And then for probably the next 20 minutes or so, I'd kind of grandstand, and I would go through and I'd be telling each of those subcontractors in that huddle what they need to go out and get done that week so that the job's moving in the right direction. And never failed. 20 minutes in, eyes are glazing over, phones are coming out, or each of those subcontractors or trade partners are just waiting for their chance to talk so they can grind an axe at the guy across the table because his ductwork was in the way last week and he couldn't go get the wall rough done that he needed to do because he was constrained. And it never failed. We'd leave, an hour-and-a-half meeting with everyone's frustrated. We had no real sense of direction of where that project's going, and we had terribly poor communication collaboration. We were lost. So that's what my previous state looks like. It may be if that's reflective of what your current state looks like today and you're not currently implementing a daily huddle, I want to kind of talk about the rules or some steps you can take to hold a successful daily huddle. Here in a minute, Keon's going to talk about specifically what you talk about in this meeting, but I want to kind of lay out the ground rules to how you hold a successful meeting like that. So the first thing is going to be is to keep it short. This one's going to be pretty tough, especially if you're transitioning from that hour to hour and a half weekly trade partner subcontractor meeting to a daily huddle. A great tool is simply take out your phone, put your timer or stopwatch up, or even go get an egg timer, set it for 20 minutes, and then start working through the material. When you start this, it'll happen. You're going to get the buzzer's going to go off, and you're going to be halfway through the material that you're used to talking about. But over time and through rigor, you're going to start developing those muscles to keep those meetings condensed and on track. 2, start on time, end on time. Show me why we're talking about that. That seems pretty rudimentary. What's the importance of starting and ending on time? With this being a tool that's going to help build and establish that culture, there's something intangible and something special when a superintendent starts and ends that meeting on time. He's showing those trade partners that he values them and he respects them, because he knows that they have a lot of stuff going on before and after that meeting. So he's going to do his best to start and finish that meeting on time, be respectful of the time so he can be respectful of them. It starts to build that trust. 3, no phones or distractions. This is in the same vein of building that culture. When you have 2 or 3 leaders, you're in a daily huddle, and maybe you're up at the boards and you're working through a problem or constraint in the field, and then one of those individuals disengages that discussion to go take a phone call or to answer a text. There's nothing more disrespectful or nothing that will faster start to break down that accountability and trust in those behaviors that you're trying to establish than showing someone that the disrespectful action of disengaging, going to talk on that phone. They've just signaled to everyone else in that meeting that whoever's on the phone is more important to them, and it just tears down what you're trying so hard to establish. 4, stand up. This one's pretty simple. When the trade partners are standing up, they have a tendency to be more engaged. They have a tendency to stay on track and keep the meeting moving in the direction that it needs to move. I see this a lot, especially in the summertime when it's hot, or in the wintertime when it's cold. If you got some nice big comfy chairs in the job trailer, the trade partners aren't really want to go. They're going to want to stay in there where it's comfortable, and they're probably not going to be as apt to pushing through that meeting and making sure you stay on pace. 5, get in a routine. If you decide to start using this tool, here's what you don't do. Hey, Monday we had a huddle. That's great. Tuesday rolled around. We had another huddle. Man, we're really cooking. You know what? We'll skip Wednesday. We'll skip Thursday, and then we'll circle back up on Friday. Don't do that. Get in the rigor of performing this meeting daily. Establish those habits and start to build that culture. 6, stay on track. I'm going to talk about 2 tools specifically to help you stay on track, because inevitably, once you start this type of meeting, you're going to have an individual in one of those huddles that's just going to take the entire meeting off track and kind of run it into the bar ditch. So a couple of tools to help you manage that is a 2-minute rule, or ELMO. So ELMO is an acronym for Enough, Let's Move On. This can be materialized by an actual stuffed Elmo doll. I've had superintendents use mini Snickers bar, or maybe even have some fun and have like an NFL yellow flag. What this is if you have an individual in that meeting and they bring up something that may be important to them. Maybe they want to talk about a submittal that they need an answer on the status on, and they go kind of on a grandstand talking about it for a while. But the issue is what might be important to them isn't important to the rest of the team. Or another way to say, it's not going to impact the workflow for that day. And we need a respectful way to say, hey, Bob, what you're saying is important, but we need to move on. So Elmo is a fun and respectful way of saying you throw the flag out or you throw the Snickers at him. You say, hey, Bob, what you got to say is important. We'll follow up with that after the meeting. But for right now, we need to stay on track, and we need to talk about the constraints that could impact the workflow today. And the other tool that we leverage alongside Elmo is the parking lot. So after you've kind of thrown the Snickers at Bob and you said, hey, Bob, we got to move on, but what you got to say is important, walk over to a parking lot board. Just throw a piece of paper up on the wall and go write down what Bob wanted to talk about. Because you're showing Bob that you care about what he says. You are showing Bob that you find it important and that you're going to follow up. And when you do that, you're signaling to Bob that level of respect and trust and accountability that you need to foster for that team and that culture. And then lastly, involve the entire team. As a superintendent, I have that tendency for command and conquer. I don't need my team with me. And I struggled with this one for a lot of years. Then I found out that I was so much better. I was such a better leader when my engineers and my project manager would be at that huddle. And if there was a question from one of those trade partners, maybe about an RFI or an ASI or submittal, and they could just rattle off the top of their head, oh, no, we got that back yesterday. Here's the answer to that RFI. We were shoring up that communication flow, and we were better as a team. So I urge you to make sure, talk to your team and try to involve everyone on that job. Maybe it's not every day. Maybe you find a system that works for you. Maybe it's Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, or Tuesdays and Thursdays. But find a way to engage your entire team. You'll be performing at that much higher level. So I'll show you what this can look like. So here's some examples of some daily huddles on both John and I's job site. This is a project that we had at Lindbeck. We're just in a 20-foot Connex office. We got some visual board tools up that we'll talk about here in a minute. And you see the trade partners are engaging one another and talking about their workflow and constraints for that day. Same example here. Here's one from Skiles Group. And then back here we got Johnny, the ductwork foreman, talking about his work for the day, communicating that with the rest of the trade leaders there in the meeting. So if you're curious about a daily huddle and you're thinking, all right, you know what, I'm gonna start our journey. We're gonna take the first right step, and we're gonna transition to a daily huddle. Here's the fruit of your labor. Here's what you can expect to take away if you switch to this type of meeting. You're gonna have greater accountability amongst those trade partner leaders. It'll be that beginning step in shifting and improving that job site culture, fostering that trust and accountability and mutual respect. And lastly, you're going to have reduced fire drills for those field leaders. Anytime I'm training a new superintendent on how to hold a successful daily huddle, I always joke with them and say, hey, you know how I know that you ran a good daily huddle? It's if your phone doesn't ring until after lunch. That tells me you talked about the workflow for that day, you talked about the constraints, and your phone shouldn't be ringing off the hook all morning, 50 fires all day.
All right, now we're going to get into play two. So to kind of compound on what Joe was talking about, the next step we feel like when you're trying to build that culture of teamwork, collaboration, and accountability on your job site is to introduce visual communication tools to your daily huddle. And so, as Joe mentioned, if you're a project superintendent and your phone's ringing off the hook and it's fire drill after fire drill all day long, there's a pretty good chance is that when the team was communicating with each other, they really weren't talking to each other, or they really are not understanding where they're supposed to be working. And so on our projects, what we like to do is when we kick off a team, we have some daily huddle cards, and we hand those out to all the trade foremen, and we just ask them to answer these 5 questions. What are they working on? Where are they working? How many crews or workers do they have working? What are their constraints? And what material deliveries do they have coming up? And by doing that each day, it gets those guys feeling more comfortable to talk about their work. But talking about it is different than actually showing where you're going to be working. And the way we handle that is we take our floor plans or our elevations, we either laminate them or we put them under laminate, and we hand out dry erase markers to each one of the trades. And each marker is a different color per trade. And we have them come up to the board and actually show each other where their work's being constrained, where they're working. We get a better understanding of how many men are working in a certain space. And by doing that, it really starts to make the light bulb go off. An example I always like to give is, I remember there was an electrical foreman telling everybody that he was installing conduit from grid line A1 to D1 on phase 2 of the second floor on Friday. And, 30 minutes into a subcontractor meeting, no one's paying attention. That doesn't mean anything. And then Friday, he was very frustrated that he got covered up. And so going forward now, it's very easy for those guys to show visually where they're supposed to be working. And that really helps with a lot of the miscommunication that can occur in the field. Another thing that's good about it is you can really show the phasing or the flow of the work. And so, for example, in a lot of our projects, we will color code the different phases. So, for instance, area A may be where we're going to start laying out walls and framing walls, and then that crew will move into area B, and then we'll start our electrical and plumbing in-wall rough. But by kind of having that racetrack color-coded where guys are understanding where the flow of the work is, it really can help with reliability in the field and making sure that the work is ready for the trades when they get to it. If you're working on a more progressive project or larger project and you have a BIM model or you have a TD, hey, that's great too if you want to visually communicate that way. I've even seen a superintendent that would go around on Friday mornings, take picture of trash piles around the job site or excess material, and then show visually on his TV in his trailer conference room, where he saw trash and where composite cleanup crews needed to go and pick up to make sure that the job was safe. But using like visual tools like that really help out a lot on the projects. Another visual tool we like to use or recommend is a material delivery board. And I'll share a story. Early in my career, I was closing down the job site on a Friday evening. It's probably 5:30, and as I was locking the gate, I saw a flatbed full of masonry coming. And I was a little upset about that because I knew the mason had rolled out probably 2 or 3 hours earlier. And so slowly operating equipment over the next hour and a half, I unloaded those pallets of brick, knowing that I'd have to come back the next morning with the mason to actually put it where it belonged, because it was a multi-phase project. We had a couple buildings going up. And I remember calling my superintendent on that Saturday morning to complain, and I'll tell you, I didn't get much sympathy from him. The phone was silent. Finally, he just said, "Hey, bud, this is just how our business is. You better get used to it." And so at that time, I was early in my lean journey. I was reading about just-in-time deliveries and came up with the idea of, hey, what if we had a material delivery board? We just have the days of the week, and we tell the trades, look, if it's not on the board, we're going to send it back. And it's not that we were trying to be rude. It was just that we started really noticing how much excess material or materials coming and getting damaged or experience any of the 8 wastes you can think of by not really monitoring what was coming on site and when. And so I was super excited to take this board to my next project, which was on an occupied healthcare campus. And you can imagine how frantic I was when I had a call from the CEO of that hospital telling me we had a flatbed 18-wheeler full of sheetrock blocking the entrance to his ER, and ambulance couldn't get in. And so I ran down there, hair on fire, and was screaming at the drywall foreman at the time. And he told me, he's like, "Hey man, it was on the material delivery board." And so based on that, I said, I think we got some room to improve this board. And so on our projects now, we ask what is being delivered, what time is it being delivered, who's delivering it, what type of trucks are coming in, how will it be unloaded, and where will it be unloaded. And it's never a surprise that, in the past, we'd get deliveries and no one thought about how we were going to get it off the truck. And so especially if you're working on an occupied campus or a very tight site, like you really got to understand how you're going to get these materials in and out of the building without causing issues. And so a material delivery board is a great place to start. I remember going to one of the universities, giving this presentation, and I was talking and bragging about this material delivery board to some of the students. And finally a hand went up, and the student really wasn't impressed. He said, "I don't understand. Why wouldn't you guys just have a material delivery board anyway?" And I wanted to tell him, I was like, hey, man, you haven't been jaded yet by the dysfunction in our business. I didn't tell him that, but he's absolutely right. Why wouldn't this be a standard on our projects? But as you guys may know, it's not, at least not across the board. And so it's another great visual communication tool. We do the same things with inspections. Remember having an inspector on a higher ed campus where, man, he'd pull up, and if no one was there to greet him or tell him where to go, he'd wait 5 minutes and he was gone, and you had to reschedule. And so what we started doing was putting up an inspection board, and as part of the huddle, everybody knew what was being inspected that day, who requested the inspection, what was the time of the inspection, and then, you know, what were the results of the inspection. And by having that up and being transparent and making sure everybody understood the upcoming inspections for the week, we saw a lot of reliability in the field. And so here's kind of an example of what an inspection board could look like on your site. Nothing special, nothing too difficult. And so if you're running a daily huddle and you start implementing some of the tips that Joe gave you, what you really want the field focused on is what we're talking about under the visual communication section. And you'll notice that if you start using visual communication tools, the trade-to-trade communication will start to improve. There will be a much greater awareness on the project's direction and where the flow of the work is going. And the collaboration between the activities will really begin to pick up. Trades will understand where they have conflicts in the field. That'll come up in the huddle. It'll go on a parking lot board, or those guys will go after the huddle themselves to go solve those issues and then bring some answers back to the superintendent, which really helps start fostering that culture of teamwork and accountability on a job site.
All right, step number 3, managing constraints. I always like to start here and outline kind of what my previous state as a superintendent looked like whenever I would manage constraints on a construction project. It would typically be initiated by a phone call that I received from a trade partner, and they called me up and say, hey, Joe, I got an issue. Can you come out here in the field and meet with me? Let's take a look at it. So I'd walk across the job site, go meet with that trade partner, take a look at what the issue or the constraint was, assess it, determine who is the appropriate trade partner that can remove this constraint. I call him or her up, have them come over, meet with us, or maybe have to go track them down, get everyone together, and then we would talk about what's going to happen, who's going to fix it, when's it going to happen, and then I would kind of pull out my little pocket card and flip over about 10 sheets or so. Then I'd write down the discussion we just had, who's doing what, and when's it going to be done by. And all the onus or all the responsibility to make sure that that happened then kind of rested on my shoulders as the superintendent. And I just find myself walking the jobs all day long, following up on this, bringing these two people together to make sure that constraint was being addressed. And I started to see the tremendous amount of waste in how I was dealing and managing with constraint resolution in the field. So in the vein of making everything visual, we decide, you know what, there's got to be a better way to manage conflicts and constraints in the field. And that's when we transitioned to using a visual constraint management board in our daily huddles. So if what I described kind of seems similar to maybe how you or maybe your people in the field handle constraint resolution, give this a shot. Just take an old drawing, flip it over, maybe just a full set side 3x4, laminate it, put it up on the board, and then identify these 4 things at that daily huddle constraint comes up. Identify what's the constraint, where's it occurring, but here's the 2 big ones. Who's responsible for fixing it? And I don't mean a trade partner company's name. I mean someone's name, Jason, Bill, Steve. Identify who's that person who's going to remove that constraint, and then also identify when's it going to be resolved. And I'll tell you what started happening when we transitioned to this type of a system. Something magic kind of happened, because what I started to see is that the trade partners, when we come to that meeting and they saw their name and that commitment of the resolution or removing that constraint for another trade partner, the constraints were starting to be resolved at a much more effective pace, much quicker than they were before. Started to realize that I wasn't a lot of times having to be that conduit between two trade partners. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. You know, you'll have two trade partners come up to you and they're talking about an issue that they have, and they're talking and directing their conversation at me as a superintendent so I can be the buffer or the middle guy to turn and look at the other trade partner and tell them what's going on, instead of those two individuals just looking at each other and talking about their issue, coordinating with one another, collaborating and solving it themselves, because at the end of the day, they own the power to remove the constraint, not me as the superintendent. And it just transformed and reduced the amount of waste I had in my daily life of constantly hiking up and down that project all over the place, bringing those leaders together to solve their constraints. So here's some representation of what that can look like. It's just a simple board. Again, just identifying, you know, what's the constraint, where's it happening, who's responsible, and when's it going to be taken care of. So if you switch to manage your constraints in this type of model, you're going to have a deepened accountability amongst those team members. There's something special when they go up to that board, they put their name on it, they write it in, knowing that they are now accountable not just to the superintendent, but they're accountable to their peers and the other leaders of the field when they come to that next level. Greater awareness of root causes. You're going to understand what's the real reason for this constraint. You're going to be making sure that that team's fighting the fire, not just fighting smoke. And then again, improved resolution speed. The superintendent's going to start to remove himself as that buffer or that conduit, connecting those two trade leaders together, and you're going to start to see them work together cohesively as a team, removing their constraints.
So before I get into last planner system, I just want to touch base on the first three things we talked about. And, you know, if you're thinking, hey, that's pretty simple, that's common sense, we do that, then, you know, I challenge you, you know, are you doing it on all your projects? Have you scaled this across your entire firm, operating in this way? And if you haven't, then this is where you start. Start shifting to a daily huddle, slowly start implementing some visual communication tools, like floor plans under laminate, like a material delivery board, like a constraint board. Start getting those trades talking to one another, referring to each other by their first name, not their company name, and really start building that team that's focused on accountability. And if you can get that culture right on your project, then, in our opinion, you're ready to start last planner system. What we've seen or heard about in our experience too many times is, you know, maybe a consultant will come in, they'll start implementing last planner, they'll do some pull plan sessions, and then as soon as that consultant leaves, time goes by, everybody reverts back. Or it just never stuck in the first place and people had a bad taste in their mouth because the culture wasn't even built on the job site to make that fertile ground. And so for us, really focusing on that first part is where we think the journey should start. And then from there, we'll move into last planner. Now, like I mentioned, this part of our presentation, I always feel like we don't have the time to do it justice because it's such an intricate system and it's very detailed and there's a lot of good lessons to be learned. But we want to talk about is at least what the last planner system is, how we utilize it in the field. And then, you know, if there's any questions at the end that we can answer, we'd love to do that. So very high level, starting off, I want to talk about master scheduling. And if you're a general contractor, this is nothing new and there's nothing different in last planner system about the way we schedule our projects from the start. You know, right now, if a client calls me and they describe that they got a 100,000 square foot medical office building that's 3 stories, how long is it going to take to build them? I should be able to give them a range of how long that should take. And then finally, when we get construction documents, our teams at our best should be able to put together a beautiful P6 schedule that outlines all the critical path and milestones for that project. But where we fail is that a lot of times we take that schedule, give it to the field, and the field thinks that they're supposed to build off of it. And I promise you, if it's a schedule that I've built, it's perfect because everything starts on Monday and finishes Friday. And I'm kidding about that, but really, that is a static schedule. and that doesn't have anybody's buy-in to it, meaning the trades. And so the way I like to describe the schedule is almost like an accordion. The start and finish are fixed, but it can stretch and compress throughout. And so as part of Last Planner System, nothing's changing. You still should have your master schedule, in our opinion. You should still be updating that baseline weekly. You should be watching the logic and the critical path. But the second step, which is phase scheduling or pull planning, is a huge opportunity to get your trade partners bought into the schedule, to have them have a voice, and to have them to talk through some potential conflicts or constraints that your team may not have thought about. And so the way we do this on our projects is we like to do pull plan sessions by milestone. So an example of this would be if we had a ground up project, we're doing a pull plan session from foundation in back to start. We'll pull from, steel or concrete up back to foundation in. We'll pull from dry in to steel or concrete up. We'll pull from air on to dry in, and we'll pull from finish out back to air on. So this is going on multiple times throughout a project. We don't like to pull plan for more than 12 to 16 week durations. And we like to really spend a lot of time up front with our trade partners talking about the why behind the pull plan, why they're there, what we're hoping they get out of it, what we're hoping we get out of it. We want them to have a voice in the schedule, but more importantly, we want them to commit that to the durations that are in the schedule and have some accountability when it comes to making those durations. And so we'll bring our trade partners in. We will start talking about the project. We'll start talking about the phasing. We'll start handing out sticky cards. Our cards, some of them are pre-made. They'll ask 3 simple questions: what the activity is, what the duration is, and what's the handoff for the predecessor. So here's a picture. You got a plumber and a tile guy. They're probably talking about restrooms, but the guys are starting to talk, and the silos are breaking down around their work, and they're starting to understand who would go first and where. And as those guys start filling out their sticky notes, we're working the room. We're making sure that there's a right amount of detail on those cards. We're making sure that the trades know for every card, there's a card. So that handoff for predecessor, if I'm an electrical foreman and I got a card, we're pulling from the in-wall rough-in inspection, like there should be a card for rough-in inspection one day. Well, what do I need to get that rough-in inspection? Well, I need all my electrical in the wall. Well, what do I need to get that electrical in the wall? Well, I need the framing up. In order to have the framing up, it needed to be laid out. In order to lay it out, especially if you're doing a rebuild or a renovation job, maybe the space had to be demoed. In order for it to be demoed, we had to make it safe. So every card's got a card, and we're really trying to make sure that everybody understands the handoffs that will allow work to begin. And as we're working the room, we definitely want no more than 10 to 15 days as a duration on a card. It never fails. Every time I go to the painter's card, it always says paint 50 days. Like, that's not the level of detail we need. We really want that to be broken up by area or by floor so we can better understand the relationship of how other work can start. And then as the trades start filling out their stickies and putting it up on the wall, we go through the pull and we work our way back through the pull session. And for us, in the field, especially the first time we're doing this, I'll go back through a couple pictures, but we don't care if the trades put the cards up from start to finish. That's fine for us. They're learning. We want to get everything up on the board, and then when it's up, we will go back from the milestone and pull it back. We really want to do the pull session to where everybody is thinking about what is releasing the work. And so on our projects, it's very important. This is a crucial step to the Last Planner System. And once the pull plan is done, then what we need to do is we need to take that information, put it back in the master schedule, we update it, and then we distribute that information out to the field. And the way we do that via Last Planner is through look-ahead planning. So when you've done your pull plan, everybody's put their dates up, everybody feels good about what's up on the board. We then move into look-ahead planning, where our superintendents will issue a 6-week look-ahead to the field every week. Now, here's an example of what that looks like on one of our projects, and you may be wondering why this isn't a Gantt schedule. we leave it up to our teams to decide how they're going to communicate that information. Some of our project superintendents aren't as strong as in scheduling software. Some of our trade foremen don't like to read or don't understand how a Gantt chart looks. It's complicated to them. We want to make this as simple as we can. And so, for this project, they kind of have it broken out by exterior and interior. We have some superintendents that color code each trade scope of work based on their dry erase marker color. But we're really building that 6-week snapshot of what is upcoming on the project. And then each week, the superintendent's only really updating a week at a time because the first 6 weeks come from the pull. And what's good about doing this is that as things begin to change in the field, you start experiencing delays, you're waiting on that RFI, or you had a couple weather days, and the schedule is no longer static. The team can actually understand in real time what's going on. And if things get out of whack too far, we know we can bring the team back in and re-pull the milestone. I think that's a crucial step that's often missed by a general contractor. We're trying to come out of the ground, and the first 3 days of the project it rained, and then some machinery broke down. Before you know it, we're 2 weeks behind schedule. But the contractor's still trying to push that broken schedule on the trades like, hey, we still got to hit this date based on the plan from the pull plan. It's like, hey, that pull plan, the way we get there is over. That plan is now done. We got to bring everybody back in and come up with a new plan. And so, an example would be is that, if you're coming out of the ground, maybe the original thought was to put the pad in, then to let the concrete guy start drilling piers. Once his piers are done and he starts grade beams, then you start your, electrical and plumbing underground. Well, you experience weather delays and some machinery failure. Like that's not going to get you to the date that you were trying to hit for your milestone. And so what we'll do is we'll bring everybody back in, and now we'll talk about, all right, what if we start piers before the pad's finished? Or what if we have 2 pier trucks going east to west? What if we change the work hours and let the concrete guys get their grade beams in for the day and then stagger the work to where, electrical and plumbing come after that? We got to look for a better plan, and the 6-week look ahead really helps articulate that.
So Keon just described kind of the first 3, when I think of last planner system, I think of it like a big cake, and that will be the first 3 layers of the cake. And then what I want to hit on is the weekly work plan, and then PPC, which would be the last 2 layers. So the weekly work plan essentially is the roadmap, that communication tool that's going to help those trades understand what's the task at hand this week and next week, and even allows the team to get a little bit more granular and allows them to actually make the individual commitments that's going to support the work to reach that milestone that's on the 6-week look ahead and that they previously pulled. So let me talk through a moment of what that looks like, and I'm going to use Keon's visual dashboard for the look ahead plan. So he uses a 3-week look ahead plan board that you see here. If you focus on the left side of the screen, what you see there in the different colors is the individual commitments that those trade partners have committed for the week, what they're going to go do to support that milestone. They're color-coded, so they're representative of each of the different trade partners there. Then from there, if they have a constraint or a need that's been identified that they need to have addressed so that work can go off, that workflow can be reliable, they highlight it and note it there. And then one more column over, you'll see the prerequisite. This is simply just a make-ready box. Is there any make-ready work that another trade partner needs to be teed up on that's, if the work's not done, is not going to allow the trade partner who made the commitment to be able to be successful that week? And then lastly, over on the right-hand side, you're going to see a bunch of numbers, and that's the resource loading. That's the number of individual manpower that they're going to put each day on that specific commitment. So again, there's something so powerful when the trade partners can come into that meeting and they can visually see the roadmap of where that project's going. The other powerful piece of the weekly work plan is this is the vehicle or the tool that provides the feedback loop back up to that 6-week look ahead that Keon just described. And it's the information piece that allows, when you go through at the end of the week and you're updating that 6-week look ahead, the variance and the issues that you had on that job site that week, that's the tool that helps that superintendent maybe come up with a different way to phase the work or sequence the work, or maybe we're going to change the hours up of how we're going to go about doing the work this week, just to make sure that we are still on track to reach the overall milestone that we pulled. This can show a few examples here. Now we got some daily huddles here, and we have a superintendent up at the boards going through those visual dashboards through using that visual look ahead of the weekly work plan there. Same here, same meeting, just a different snapshot, looking back at that 2-week board. And again, another example, superintendent on the huddle going through with the different visual communication tools. Here's an example from a Lindbeck board. See the work there, the commitments there on the left-hand side, and you see over on the right-hand side the resource loading. I think the next picture is a blow-up of the milestones. Now, that's an important note that I didn't mention earlier when describing the boards. It's so important to make sure your team knows those milestones. What's the next big milestone? What's the milestone from the last pool? Where are we going as a team? It never fails. Here on this board, if you look up in the top right corner, you'll see the project milestone tracking heading. Oftentimes, I can go on a project, I can walk around, and I can go find a trade leader or even a craftsman on the floor, and I'll ask them, hey, what's your next milestone? What are you working towards right now? And it never fails. 9 times out of 10, they can't tell me what they're working towards. What's the next goal? What's the next milestone? They're just showing up, and they're just pushing work because for some reason we felt that we got to keep that information hidden from our trade partners instead of making sure that we're being open, we're being honest, we're being accountable to one another, and we're sharing where that project's going together. So the last kind of layer of the last planner system is the PPC, or percent plan complete. And for some reason, oftentimes this gets skipped over, and I don't know why, because to me that it's so important to make sure you take the time and the diligence to perform the PPC, because it's the learning, it's the application, it's the piece where you understand, why did we fail as a team? Why were commitments not made? So that you can have a better understanding of what the root cause and what that variance was, so that as you create that work plan for the next week, you can shore up those areas that the team failed. So let me walk through how Keon and I's firms would establish PPC in the field, and then we'll talk about how we graphically represent that in our visual communication style. Flip back one, there we go. So on Fridays, typically in our daily huddles, our Friday daily huddle will be about 15 to 20 minutes longer than Monday through Thursday. After we go through the daily huddle, and we're already done talking about the constraints and the workflow for the day, we're going to go through and we're going to do what's called the white down session. And I'm going to facilitate the grading of the board. Now, during this grading, I'm only focusing on that first week. I'm not grading the second or the third week on that visual communication board that you see right there. Now, I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to go down each and every item, and I'm going to ask the trade partners, hey, for example, ductwork, roof area C. Hey, Jason, was this done this week? They either say yes or no. I'll continue down the line, yes, 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 and then when I get to a no, I pause. And then from there, we have a discussion as a team, what was the root cause? And that trade partner is going to explain what was the real reason why they weren't able to make that commitment to the team. Some common examples that we use within Lindbeck and Skiles is, did you have weather impacts? Did you have machinery breakdown? Or maybe machinery didn't show up? About materials, did you not have all the right materials that you needed to go perform that? Was there a design issue? Was there an ASI you needed, or a RFI response, or a submittal that you needed back that you didn't have, so the work wasn't able to be performed? About make ready, was there another scope of work that needed to be done but it wasn't done, so you couldn't go get your work? And there's a host of other root causes. But what we want to understand is what's the real reason, so we can understand the variance, triggering us as field leaders to go have the right crucial conversations or go make the right phone calls and make sure that we have a plan in place to recover the following week, and also shore up and put that buffer in place to make sure that the workflow is going to be reliable as the weeks continue. So after we've gone through each of the activities that you saw on that visual communication board, what we're going to do is we're going to take the total number of commitments, we're going to divide by the activities that were completed, and that's going to establish our PPC percentage. Now, oftentimes PPC gets identified as production tracking, and this isn't production tracking. This isn't measuring how much work we got done in the field. What PPC is measuring is how well did we work as a team this week? How well did we hold our commitments to one another as a team? And if that percentage level is in that 70 to 75 range, we have a pretty reliable workflow and work's going in place at the right pace, and we're going to maintain schedule. Below that, we got some issues. Above that, we probably have a little sandbagging. We're not challenging the team as much as we should. So now we've talked about how we've established the PPC, what it represents, and now we want to show you some examples of how we graphically represent that and show that to our team leaders there in the field. We used to try to share this information in Excel. We'd go back and engineer, we'd put it into Excel, we'd have some great graphs, and we'd bring that out and we'd hand that out to the trade partners in the meeting, and it just, for some reason, it wasn't tangible to them. It didn't resonate with them, and oftentimes they throw it in the trash can on the way out, or it'd sit on the dash of their pickup truck. But when we changed and started graphically showing in an analog format in that huddle what the team's PPC was, and the superintendent pulls out his phone, he does a quick calculation, establishes a score, and grabs a dry erase marker, marks how well the team did that week, and then also graphs what was the root causes, what was the reasons for our failures, and graphically shows that. The team really started to respond to that, and they started to engage when we were shown. So as we started to have great weeks and we had high PPCs, the team was excited, they were pumped, and then when we had weeks that weren't as good, you could almost see the team coming together and making sure that they were coordinating and communicating at a deeper level to make sure that they didn't have another bad score as next week approached. So if you've done the right steps, you started to create that culture, you got the right behaviors in place, and you're going to go take that next step and move to the more calculus level tools such as the last planner system, here's what you can expect to take away by leveraging that tool. You're going to have a trade validated schedule. You're going to focus on pull, not push. You're going to bring those trade partners in. You're going to make sure that you have buy-in and consensus with how you're going to go do the work. Are those durations correct? Is the make-ready work correct? And you now have a schedule that wasn't created in a silo that you're pushing down on those trades, but you have a schedule that those trades are bought into and that they're willing to go above and beyond and make sure those commitments are met because they put their own on it, they put their signature on it, and they're behind it. Improve constraint identification as well as resolution of activities using those look-aheads. You're going to be able to see those constraints that can impact the workflow at a higher level when you're using that 6-week look-ahead. You're moving that into the weekly work plan, and you're able to react and move and make sure that you can put a buffer in place or make the right moves so that workflow is not as impacted as it would be if you weren't using those types of tools until it's too late, and then you have a significant impact to your workflow. And then last, a clear team understanding of weekly milestones and learning around the failures. Understanding what was the root cause, understanding the variance so the right buffer can be put in place, the right conversations can be had to shore up and to make that workflow reliable for the next week.
So I know that seemed kind of fast, and, last planner system is a bit complex. But, again, the way we try to outline it in the book is the first part of the book is written as a fable. We were inspired by Patrick Lencioni and the way he wrote 5 dysfunctions of a team or the ideal team player. And so it's really easy to follow. You're watching two superintendents, and one mentoring another superintendent as he goes along his lean journey, talking about the exact principles we talked about today. And then at the end of the book is what we call the playbook, and it's really Joe and I giving our best practices. And I always tell people I've probably done 200 or 300 pull plans, and the first 150 suck. Like, I've learned so much from when things go wrong, or experimenting. Hey, let's do a pull plan with chairs. Let's do a pull plan without chairs. Let's have the trades pre-fill their cards. Let's all different ways of doing it to try to find what really seemed to be working the best for them. And that's in the book, as well as other best practices on how to actually implement this on your project. The book's a very easy read. There's not many big words in it because Joe and I don't know many. It's in what we call superintendent font, and there's about 40 or so illustrations in the book. So, but even then, if your field guys are not the reading type, the book's also on Audible to where they can listen to it on their drive into work.